There's been a lot of talk lately in the media of the intelligence community. Much of it has been congratulatory. On the other hand, many believe that intelligence agencies are completely out of control. I'd like to examine the history of three well-known intelligence agencies: the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA. A good place to start might be in the early 20th century. Anarchism had its roots in America well before this time, but at the turn of the century, anarchists were committing assassinations and bombings. And on September 6, 1901, an American anarchist named Leon Czolgosz assassinated U.S. President William McKinley. The new president, Theodore Roosevelt, wished to more thoroughly monitor anarchists. The Bureau of Investigation was created on July 26, 1908. In 1935, it officially became known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This man is John Edgar Hoover, popularly known as J. Edgar Hoover. During the Red Scare, J. Edgar Hoover became head of the Bureau of Investigation's new General Intelligence Division, which was tasked with monitoring and disrupting domestic radicals. But how does one actually define what a radical is? We can all probably agree that an anarchist planning to bomb a public venue can be considered a radical. But what about people who are in a labor union, petitioning to improve working conditions? Can these people be considered potential communist radicals? Let's fast forward to 1956. The Cold War had begun. Fear of communist infiltration led J. Edgar Hoover to implement perhaps the most controversial program in the FBI's known history, the Counterintelligence Program, also known as COINTELPRO. This was a covert program meant to target those that Hoover considered to be potential communist radicals. Many happened to be civil rights leaders. The FBI planted false media stories, committed vandalism, assaults, and even assassinations. Perhaps the most infamous case was when the FBI wiretapped Martin Luther King and obtained tapes of him having an affair in a hotel. They sent the tapes to his house along with a letter, which Martin Luther King believed urged him to commit suicide. Other famous people who were spied on include Muhammad Ali, Jane Fonda, Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, John Lennon, and Huey Newton. I don't have enough time to go through every single victim of COINTELPRO. So how do we actually know about COINTELPRO? Well, on March 8, 1971, for the first time ever, two undefeated boxers, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, fought each other for the heavyweight title in what's known as the Fight of the Century. This fight provided the perfect cover for a group of activists called the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. This group broke into the FBI office and stole 1,000 classified documents. They anonymously mailed these documents to several newspapers, and eventually the Washington Post ran a front-page story on them. In 1976, the Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church of Idaho, launched a full-on investigation of the FBI and COINTELPRO, and many of the documents have actually been released. It's also important to note that J. Edgar Hoover intimidated all sorts of politicians. President Harry S. Truman said the following of Hoover: "We want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is tending in that direction. They are dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail. J. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him. Media manipulation, assassinations, infiltration. These kinds of things don't seem realistic to the average American. In fact, if you bring up the idea of a U.S. intelligence agency doing these kinds of things, you might be deemed as a conspiracy theorist." Now let's move on to the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was created on July 26, 1947, when President Harry S. Truman signed the National Security Act. The United States of America is sometimes called the policeman of the world, the protector of democracy. But classified documents reveal a different story. The CIA, involving the invasion of privacy. In 2017, WikiLeaks published 8,000 CIA documents, nicknamed Vault 7, which dated from 2013 to 2016. It revealed the CIA's ability to hack into cars, smart TVs, web browsers like Google Chrome and Firefox, and smartphone operating systems like Apple's iOS and Google's Android, and other operating systems like Microsoft Windows and Mac OS. Now let's move on to torture. Operation MKUltra, also known as the CIA Mind Control Program. This was a program meant to identify drugs and other methods that could be used to weaken the mind and will of a person before an interrogation. U.S. and Canadian citizens were used as unwitting test subjects. They were administered drugs, one of which was LSD. Finally, let's discuss the National Security Agency. It was formed in 1952 under President Harry S. Truman. The Patriot Act was signed into law shortly after the attacks on 9/11. This act expanded authority of U.S. law enforcement agencies to fight terrorism by allowing them to search telephone and email communications and medical and financial records. NSA's prison program were released. The PRISM program allows the NSA to collect internet communications data from various US internet companies. The Snowden leaks also revealed the existence of X-Keyscore, which was a secret NSA program that allowed the agency to search vast amounts of metadata, emails, browser history, and more using name, IP address, telephone number, and keywords. ISPs and telecommunication companies like Verizon and AT&T have been granted immunity for participating in mass surveillance. By tapping into every electronic device in the digital age, the NSA is essentially abolishing privacy completely. One way to make the masses conform to the rules is to make them feel as if they're being watched. When people are being watched, they tend to conform to social orthodoxy. People even notice that prisoners are more likely to follow the rules when being watched. This led to the design of the panopticon. In this design, the prison cells face the center of the prison, and in the center of the prison is a guard tower with the windows facing in all directions. The windows, however, are tinted, so the prisoners don't actually know if they're being watched. This design has the effect of making all prisoners feel as if they're being watched at all times, so they behave better. In the same way that the panopticon breeds conformity and subservience in the prison, governments that employ mass surveillance tend to elicit these qualities within their citizenry. Now, in case you don't know, civil liberties are personal freedoms that the government cannot infringe. The United States of America was founded as the result of colonies violently rebelling against a tyrannical government. Many of the founding fathers were suspicious of the formation of a strong, centralized government. So they decided to explicitly write out some of these civil liberties, so the new federal government they just created wouldn't turn into the monster they had just defeated. The Bill of Rights contains the first 10 amendments, and it explicitly states some incredibly important civil liberties. The reason I mention this is because the Palmer raids violated the Fourth Amendment, which protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government without a warrant or probable cause. Many also felt that the First Amendment, more specifically freedom of speech and freedom of press, were being threatened, since it seemed that even associating with anarchism or communism in the slightest manner would put you on a list of suspected radicals. Many of these extreme measures are often defended by people who consider them to be necessary evils that must be pursued in order to ensure the safety of America. How do you define America? Well, some may look at where the borders lie and define it as a piece of land. Others may look at the current cultural trends and values to define the country. But many also look at the values laid down by the Founding Fathers, one of which, and perhaps the most important, is freedom. The freedom of speech, the freedom of press, protection from warrantless searches and seizures without probable cause, protection from compelled incrimination, and the right to a public and speedy trial by an impartial jury. Now at this point, some may be asking, why is privacy important? Now, let's assume that you have no problem with this. Well, I'd like to take you back to 1941. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Shortly after this happened, US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued an executive order to round up Japanese Americans on the West Coast into concentration camps. The seemingly harmless US Census Bureau had previously collected a massive amount of data on the American people, and it provided data to the government to help round up over 100,000 Japanese Americans. Simply put, you may have nothing to hide today, but tomorrow you just might.